Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, back with another edition of build reviewing for a huge league that everybody loved, and that is Necropolis. Didn't play it quite as long as most other leagues, so we had in the end about 13 builds. Some changed a bit, and one I didn't really post, so I think it's like 12 or 13. And some pretty out there builds, some pretty wacky ones, some pretty high end gear ones, because Necropolis did have some very high end gear available. And then some slightly more basic ones. So a couple minutes on each build as usual, talk about each build, how it went in Necropolis, and yeah, nothing to do but get started. So I started off with Ele Hit Wanda. There's a new Ele Hit of the Spectrum, I think it was, which let all your elements apply on every hit instead of cycling, and I tried to do it as a wanding base. Starting as a wander is never a huge idea. It's a bit risky, a bit dangerous. They typically want gear. They typically want an established financial base. So it was a bit tough. It was a bit squishy. It didn't have the biggest damage, but it did show me what Elemental Hit of Spectrum was like. And it was pretty impressive. It was a good skill. It was very messy visually, as you can see, even just during the campaign. Things got pretty dumb, and then we ramped a bit further later on. Took it all the way to, like, I don't know, level 93 or something, so it did go pretty high. It did try and do some decent min-max on gear, and it was a starter. It got me through, like, most of the maps and up to the starting of bosses and stuff, but it needed more gear to be truly good. Of course, Ele Hit and then Wanding both combined definitely need a bit more gear. And then, as we later found out, for a lot of people, Ele Hit Spectrum, very meta, very strong bow build in the end, and it went down a treat. So Ele Hit Spectrum, great. My starter, okay. Probably not something I would have recommended to people after the fact, but it was an okay build, and it was pretty fun to at least try. So let's, as usual, try and get into some ratings, see what the fuck's going on. Ele Hit Wanda, effectiveness, leveled okay, end game mapped okay, nothing too crazy. I'd say this one wasn't huge, something like a 6. It started and all that, but compared to like real starters, it was, yeah, a little bit mediocre. The enjoyment of it, I'd say, was fairly decent, but once again, nothing crazy. Visually nice, could be a bit messy. Died here or there because it's kind of squish, and the DPS wasn't huge. Probably give it a 7. And then realistic gear, I mean, yeah, it was definitely realistic, but to take it to the better levels, you wanted better gear, and you know, we're going to factor that in. So let's call that something like a 7 as well. So yeah, not a bad score overall, and there's probably going to be a lot of fairly low scores because realistic gear for this league is a bit of a doozy. The next build was one I basically had to do as a challenge for sub goals, sub rewards, and it was just supposed to be pure pain for me, which is the Quin 69 Bleed Earthquake Chieftain. Kind of just a, you know, pretty basic all-around starter style build that doesn't have any super crazy interactions because it is designed for HCSSF, so it should be pretty replicable, should be pretty doable. And I suppose, given that there's going to be some thick buffs coming to most things melee based, it's going to be a better build and a bit more well-rounded because I played it. It was actually surprisingly, like, fun enough for what it was, because pretty basic, you know, sort of attack, bonk, get some bleeds situation. It was, yeah, a little bit thick, nothing too crazy as well, because like I said, didn't go too hard on gear or anything with that. But it ended up being an okay build. Like, it had okay bleed DPS. It let me take on endgame bosses, just not the absolute tippity top, because the damage wasn't quite there for that, I don't think. It was either not quite enough damage or not quite enough survivability. Probably needed a bit more of both. And yeah, if you went way higher in the budget, it probably may have hit that. These days, just thinking about it, it'd probably be twice as good because of the new buffs to melee skills. You wouldn't have these totems anymore. You wouldn't have to rely on totems. Instead, you just have something like twice as much earthquake damage, and that'd be pretty decent. It should make it a decent enough build and pretty realistic to copy in the new setting, the new league. So not too bad. Bit of a vanilla build though, so you know, if you're looking for something like that, by all means, Chieftain Earthquake Bleed could be a thing. But Chieftain maybe just isn't really the right choice for the bleed meta, especially given that you can go Glad now with the new rework. So there's that. But Earthquake Bleed, tried and tested sort of concept as old as time. By all means, gonna be good, gonna work in some decent fashion. Effectiveness, the tippity top of the end game wasn't super great. The clear speed wasn't super great, but overall, I mean, pretty effective, right? Fairly potent, as we might say. The enjoyment of it, much more than I thought it would be. I was very pain champ about it. I was not hoping like we'd hit the goal and then had to do it, and really not looking forward to it, especially as a second character of a league, because you want to tear into like some, you know, disgusting stuff as a second character. But, you know, it's much more than I thought it would be. I'd still give it something like, I don't know, nothing huge, maybe a 6. And then realistic, yeah, it was indeed pretty realistic. To take it to the next level, to actually make it a proper build, we'd be calling, you know, Adorned, which no longer doable. Ralakesh boots, which were pretty unrealistic at the time as well. It is realistic enough. We got to give it a decent rating there too. And it would be unfortunate if this ends up being one of the highest rated, because, you know, it is what it is, right? But 16, that 22, right? Not a bad score, all things considered. The next build was Penis Brand, or Penance Brand, whatever you want to say. We typically call it Penis Brand. Penis Brand Zerka. This one was trying the new rage casting situation that was introduced thanks to a new hat, and it turned like some of your rage into spell damage and cast damage, which looked like it had big potential. And it certainly was something. Like, it was actually a pretty damn solid meta or archetype or whatever you want to call it, of way to build a character. Unfortunately, that hat is getting nerfed this league, so I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as good. But the take-home message is, I played Penance Brand after it got nerfed. It was, you know, prior to this league, one of the most meta powerful skills of the league, and maybe ever. One of the most powerful like meta skills ever in that previous league. It was very strong. It got nerfed. Not many people played it. Not many people gave a shit about it. I played it in a very nerfed state, and it was still very, very strong. Nothing's really changed on that front, I don't think. So if you want to do some brand action, want to do some Penance brand action this league, it should still be very insane. The playstyle is crazy. You just put down a couple of Penance brands and run around or run away, whatever the fuck you want to do, and it just decimates. It can get really big area, it can get really good damage, you can build some survivability and actually have a survivable play style. And on top of that, we will now have boss life bars, so you're going to be able to see the damage you do to bosses wherever the fuck you are. So it's going to be a comfortable thing for brands, I think. But overall, yeah, couldn't say enough nice things about Penance brand. It was extremely strong, even though it was nerfed, and it just made me think, how the fuck did it exist the prior league in that unnerfed state, in that just crazy state? It had to be one of the most insane things the game has ever had. So with that, if we have a quick look at our rating system, effectiveness, overall it was pretty much a 10. It maybe could have cleared a bit better, because brands don't clear the best. You got to, like, you know, take a bit of time to do stuff. The enjoyment of it was probably a 9. Pretty novelty, just seeing big explosions and, you know, big damage and all that. And the realistic gear portion, if we look at our character's gear for this one, it was a bit different. We tried to maximize rage to do the rage casting thing. The hat is the big one though, which gives cast speed instead of attack speed. Attack speed no longer exists in that way. And then spell damage instead of attack damage. I think that's just going to give you more spell damage instead of increased attack damage, which is okay, but maybe not really as good, because basically what this did is give you all of the cast speed you'll ever need and all of the spell damage you'll ever need, and then allow you to build other things in the character. Now that won't be the case, and you're actually going to have a lot of cast speed on your gear and, you know, spell damage, and then you just get a more multiplier at the end of the day, which will still be doable. It's still kind of decent, I think. But yeah, it'll probably be more gear heavy to like balance everything on the character instead of just having the hat do everything and then do whatever you want outside of that. So that's going to be the big challenge, but still probably a doable archetype by all means, like rage casting. And what else needed to be said about all this? Some of the gear is going to be a bit more unrealistic, but recombinators might bring it back, and same with Calandra Jewelry. Calandra Jewelry will give you lots of cast speed potentially, maybe lots of life, that sort of thing. But yeah, it was a tough setup of gear to really kind of replicate, at least early on, I'd say. So it's going to be, let's say, realistic gear. Well, considering the hat, we have to bring this one down. You know, it deserves a little bit more. I'd say 19, so that gives it a total of 24. Next build was trying to use a meme item that I basically had never used and was scared to use, and that is the Winds of Fate staff that has like 600 to 1,000 physical damage, but doesn't crit a lot of the time, or doesn't hit because it has a certain amount of crit that you can only have. It's actually just a weird interaction to even explain, because the new Glacial Hammer would always crit on the third hit. The staff would not let you get beyond a certain amount of crit, so you tried to bypass the staff's negative by using Glacial Hammer to turn the negative into kind of a positive. And it creates what you can see kind of on screen, you can kind of see, a sort of lagged delay effect to your crits and hits, because the first couple are going to do damn near nothing, and then you have a really big crit. And it was an interesting playstyle for sure. It caused what I think was somewhat of a satisfying playstyle, but still left something to be desired. So what you could see is we scaled a lot of crit multi, and every third hit, you just start chunking life bars. You would go pretty ballistic with the damage on just a single hit instead of like a DPS, a good uptime or something. And it was actually a pretty damn strong build in the end. Given that Glacial Hammer is going to be much better now, post buffs, it's getting like twice as much numbers or something, and you won't have to worry about totem uptime. I foresee Glacial Hammer doing some absolutely filthy things this league, and the Winds of Fate staff even. If you actually want to use that thing got pretty close to 20% better because of the new quality change and the way it had a lot of percent fizz. Instead, with the quality, it means it's pretty much got 20% more damage. I'm not sure I would really recommend Winds of Fate with this sort of a Glacial Hammer setup. It combined well to counteract its like sort of upside downside with the new Glacial Hammer, but if you just played a regular Glacial Hammer with a good staff, you would have probably had a nicer feeling character. That's all there is to it. This one's just a good like sort of default item to buy and build into, but it's also kind of hard to get. They're rare, and not many people are selling them because they come from Sanctum that's on a very rare relic that then someone has to run. So yeah, it's a tough item to get, and there are some things that changed about this, of course, with totems, with Berserker, with Rage. But at the end of the day, Glacial Hammer should still be very strong in many different ways. This one should still be playable, but you're going to need a lot of changes to the build. But overall, as you can see, you can do some good chunking, and it was kind of a fun situation to go through. So with that, let's have a look at things. Effectiveness, we were still melee, we weren't super thick, but our clear speed was insane, our boss DPS was insane. I have to give it some pretty high score there. The enjoyment, it was a high amount of memes, it was a high amount of fun. At the end of the day, like I said, I did kind of wish I wasn't having that delayed effect and just having some regular normal crits, but it was still a lot of fun to play. Realistic gear, so it might be kind of realistic, but also kind of hard to replicate. We got the Winds of Fate, like I said, hard to get if, people are looking for it. When I made this thing, this character, this build, these things were worthless. We're talking like 1 divine at the most or something. Maybe that'll happen again, if no one's really playing with it, fucking with it. But you do have to stack crit multi, so we did things like this, we did things like that. Had these, which are a pretty end game item, but if no one's using them, they're kind of cheap, so they might be tough to get. Really depends. Early on, they especially will be. Utula's is decent, but given that everything else got buffed, this thing is relatively a bit weaker. And then good versions of these rings are tough to get, and people do look at them now. So getting a good combo will be tough. So the gear I'd say is not terribly realistic, but for a decent Glacial hammer that can get you going and stuff, it shouldn't be too hard to put together some kind of a setup. I reckon that probably deserves a 5 as well. So give that in total a 23. Next up was the new Frostblades that I decided to tackle for the first time. I think it was introduced to the league before and I'm a league late to it, but I don't remember. Either way, it is the Frostblades of Katabasis, which is a very different way of like building and utilizing Frostblades, and that is turning it into a cold damage over time. So essentially what happens is the build just becomes like a Vortex or a Creeping Frost, or a Wintertide brand, something like that. You scale gem levels, but at the same time you got to scale like the attack, like your attack speed, because you are in attack build. And I built it as an occultist, as most cold dots would, but I also tried to utilize some thickness tanky tech. So I think this one was like CI with a lot of armor with Aegis Aurora. So like block on hit, and it became a pretty reliable, solid, thick character. As you can see, I'm like taking on all kinds of dumb content throughout this stuff, like the hidden, feared, with pretty dangerous modifiers. And yeah, I could still die. I wasn't unkillable, and I still had to play the game here or there. But I'm taking and just eating so much more shit than almost any other character I've built up till now, I think. And it also was my like first real reliable tier 17 map clearer, because if I was taking small hits, I was pretty much unkillable, could die to big hits, and a lot of the time tier 17s were the sum of a lot of small hits killing you. And thus we could just like go through the tier 17s and kind of just face roll. The explosions were really cool and satisfying in this build, thanks to being a cultist. It was just a bit of a slow build is the only real problem. So after playing it for a good while, I felt like I was a bit, bored of being a bit slower. But it was super reliable and thick and fun for like larger maps and tier 17s and really thick content, because you weren't really going to run the risk of dying, and then you'd have cool explosions. It's just once that cool factor ran out, you'd kind of be like, man, I'm kind of slow and I want to zoom again. That's the only real problem. And as well as that, you can see the single target is nothing crazy. It's just solid, bit reliable, and then you just watch life bars tick down. So it had its problems in the fun category at the end of the day, but for the most part, a very solid build and a different way of building as well. I think it gave me a wave 30 simulacrum as well, because once again, smaller hits typically won't kill you. But the end simulacrums that were, with some pretty tough modifiers still could, because they had some pretty silly modifiers and I wasn't that overcapped on the defense and the tankiness. Still a very solid build and solid way of building a Frostblades or a Cold Dot. It did pretty damn good. I didn't think it would do quite that good, so I was pleased enough with it. The effectiveness, given that it's not super fast, given that it's not the best damage, that has to take some points away, but overall, it could do just about everything and be pretty damn good in that right. I'd have to call that like a 9. The enjoyment of it started out pretty decent. In the end, you kind of want to be faster and move on. Still have to give that maybe like an 8. And the realistic gear, I don't think it was anything too crazy, so maybe it's kind of realistic. Let's have a quick look. I did use a Nebulous because I wanted to make use of Nebulous for the first time with a good implicit. That thing isn't that crazy or like necessary for the build to work. It's not anything special. Whereas one of these is definitely a big boon to the build, while not being the easiest to get. They weren't super expensive at the time, but it's not easy to get, let's just say. While Aegis Aurora pretty easy, and then just good energy shield gear was basically a result of Necropolis, but shouldn't be too crazy to do otherwise. So not too unrealistic. I'd call this something like a 7 probably, because it wasn't too hard to do. So we're talking that, which is a total of, I didn't bring enough brain cells today, 17, 24, maybe. Next up, we have my first attempt at another transfigured gem, and that is Molten Strike of Zenith. I didn't think this one looked too impressive, but I was assured by multiple people that it's a pretty good feeling gem, and the big difference is that it has like a big payload. I think it's every 5th attack, something like that, for 1,000 extra damage, but otherwise it's got like a low amount of damage to begin with, and yeah, the idea is you basically have to build some level of attack speed so that you get to your bigger hit a bit quicker and try and scale well enough that your smaller hits kill stuff as well. But then when that big hit comes in, it clears the screen or it kills the boss or it just deletes shit. And I tried to do a pretty hipster version of this one once again. It has to use a two-hander for starters, so we did use a two-hander, and I did go with a trickster that used a Shroud of the Lightless to stack a lot of jewels. So the idea was I was basically stacking a lot of flat Ele jewels with like a two-handed axe, I think it was, or sword. I don't fucking remember. We'll go over that in a sec. Yeah, stack a lot of flat Ele and then just have the Zenith chunk shit when it comes in with the bigger hit. So you can see there's like little hits. You can see that Molten Strike's still doing damage, but once that big Zenith hit kicks in, it just wipes the floor with bosses. It's a very strong skill. It got stronger, so you should be pretty excited to do that if you want to. A more meta way of doing this one is with Arachiatas. So that's a pretty stock standard, easy way of building this type of character without going into such heavy memes like I went to. It took on tier 17s, it took on Uber bosses. This is the new buffed Uber Maven that has 70% less damage taken. And it did all of that stuff, even as just a pure melee character, and as a two-handed trickster, which is like a weird setup. So sky's the ceiling, I think, on something like this. With really good gear, with a really good ascendancy, with some of the most meta shit possible. Yeah, Molten Strike of Zenith is huge. The effectiveness, I think it pretty much did everything fairly nicely. I have to give this one basically a 10. It cleared fairly well. It single targeted fairly well, and it wasn't exactly that squishy of a character, so it could take some hits here or there. The enjoyment was more or less a 9. Not maximum enjoyment. I think I needed more attack speed to hit that because it's a two-hander and I was a trickster, which the way I built didn't really give me as much attack speed as I wanted, I don't think. But otherwise, pretty good. It was very fun, and I would do Molten Strike Zenith again. May even do it as a starter. And the gear. So that was a tough one because I tried to go pretty hipster. So Shroud of the Lightless, 2 sockets, not too hard to get. 3-socket one, very hard to get. You no longer need to do totems, which is good. So that frees up 1 totem slot, I suppose, but that's not really a big deal. Max Frenzy, Tomb Fist, regular Bubonics, the new hat that has 4 sockets with a power charge, and then my axe was actually honestly pretty dog shit. Like this is, you could have crafted an axe damn near twice as good as this when we're talking Necropolis. I had a pretty humble axe, but it had decent enough stats. Nothing crazy in the damage. So I actually went Fizz Convert in the end. I fucked up. I thought I did Ele, flat Ele. I went Fizz with a basic Fizz axe and then did Fizz Convert, and then I tried to stack Fizz as extra fire. So this was a very hipster way of trying to build something like this, and I don't think I would recommend it again, because just putting on a good Ele axe outscaled everything I had, and yeah, Arachiatas is going to be the way to go, I'd say. Nothing too hard about the gear, but nothing too, you know, starterable. I'd say it's a pretty solid score overall. It has to be like fairly realistic gear. Given that you can do Arachiatas, I'm going to have to give this like a fucking 8. It needs a high score. It was a good character, and Zenith is very good as well. So that has to give something like a 27. The next one was my first attempt at a poison concoction build with the new transfigured gem, which is bouncy transfigured poisonous concoction. I had not really known anything about this gem up to that point, except for the fact that people have been using it. It was pretty good, and it was mostly done in poison fashions. But I didn't want to do it in the same normal fashion as everyone else, so I tried to build it with a slight thinking outside the box of no poison, and instead just hit base. Try and go crit multi, and scale some extra bounces with it because the bounces could overlap on enemies. And with that, I tried to build a pretty thick Scion. Maybe it was using Perseverance Belt. No, not quite sure. Yes, I think maybe it was. That I couldn't quite get enough armor evasion onto to even justify as Perseverance. So in the end, I did build this character to try and be crit hit based, and I think the conclusion pretty early on was, yeah, poison's just going to be better, and you should be poison doing this. I still made it to pretty high levels, like 94 or something like that, and it was a thick character, and it was enjoyable enough because the poison conc of bounce is very fun to play with, and it's very fun to level with, especially early on. It's like one of the craziest scaling early skills, I think, for leveling. And it made me think that I could do a probably better attempt at something else meme with poisonous concoction. So it actually led me to make a second version of this skill and build a bit later on. So it's the first time that's actually happened, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So in the end, yeah, this character, it was thick, it was pretty fun, but it just felt a bit lackluster knowing what I put into it and the end result compared to a poison version, which would just go way harder. So it did feel a bit bad because of that, but it led me to see Poison's Concoction for the first time as a bouncy variant and how good it was, how fun it was, and then explore other options for it. So with that, the realism of the gear, let me just have a quick look at the gear before we do the other ratings. It actually wasn't super hard to gear, and I did use Perseverance, and I didn't get that much out of it. The only real difficult thing was trying to get a double +2 chest. One of these was actually pretty cheap on the market, but obviously replicating it's very hard, and I tried to kind of do as big of a starting point with it as possible to make sure it was worth doing, and then it still kind of wasn't. So hard to replicate that piece of gear. The rest of it was pretty easy, but it's not really that worth doing. So with that, the effectiveness, it cleared okay. It's single targeted, kind of whatever. I'd have to give it something like a 7. The enjoyment of it, very fun to discover for the first time as a skill, very fun to level with, very fun to try and manipulate in a good build fashion. But then it just kind of ran out of steam in the enjoyment category when you knew this is kind of shit compared to what it should be. So we'd still have to give it a decent score of like an 8. The realism of the gear, I'd say it was pretty realistic, but getting it to the same point pretty much required a chest this thick, and then once again, just not a very good result for what it was. So don't even know if it's really worth trying to chase down something like this in a similar fashion for the crit base, as opposed to just using something like this for a nice poison base instead. Realistic enough for the most part, outside of course, just that one item. And that gives us a total of nothing too good, something like 21. The next build was a fucking crazy one and a crazy amount of fun. It was the new Tornado gem, and the first time I'd actually tried it out or really seen it in any large capacity. I was aware that people were playing Tornado, and some people liked it, some people didn't, So I was aware that there was enough potential out there that I had to try it myself, and it was pretty damn crazy. It was a lot of fun. I built it as an Elementalist. I do have the Sharknado MTX here, and I built it in a way that I wanted to kind of accentuate its speed and its quality. So I went with the heist hat that gave double damage and quality. Can't remember what it's called at the moment. Just the one socket hat, and it worked out really well. It was worth using in that. You could otherwise do the same setup with Dialas as also an alternative way of scaling like the quality and the whole thing. But I wanted to do the Crest of Desire for the first time in a while, and I did try to make a pretty good use of it. Elementalist, once again, I think last time I used Crest of Desire was an Elementalist, and I knew that that had potential, and I wanted to scale like all of the elements at the same time. The fizz is extra, And it worked out, yeah, really well. Like you send the tornadoes out, they hunt things down, they home. And to me, it seemed like the best feeling tornado style skill I've played in any ARPG up to this point. We, of course, all know Diablo 2, the famous one to begin with. I hated that thing. It feels shit and it just has a mind of its own and then just goes away somewhere. Whereas this one locks in, homes on, the boys fuck shit up for you, and it had good damage potential. And it also kind of ended up playing a bit like a brand playstyle where you could send out a few tornadoes and then kind of sit back and not have to face tank too much of the damage. It was a big favorite of mine when I started playing it, and there's lots of different ways you can build this thing, and it can have really good damage as well. The visibility gets a bit tough, you know, if you've got a lot of these going out with the Sharknado, and I'm also using Heralds and Herald Explosion effects, so a lot of cool shit happening there. So that's maybe one of the only real downsides, like potential visibility here or there. But otherwise, great skill, a lot of different ways to build around it, and the character that I tried to make for this felt pretty damn good too. Huge damage as well. I do remember it doing good single target. Maybe I have some examples of that too. Some tier 17 action. I think this is Maven. Yep, did good there. And yeah, something like that. So with that, let's get to our rating. Effectiveness, I think it was pretty much a 10. Cleared real well and did real good single target and good playstyle. Enjoyment, got to give that a 10. It was a fuck ton of fun, and pretty much anyone that's played Tornado since has been like, yo, that was a lot of fun. So, you know, crowd pleaser in general. Realistic score for gear. Don't know about that. We did, of course, use Ralakesh to try and make sure everything was good as possible for this kind of build, and they are still as strong as ever, but they will be very expensive early into the league, I wager. Crest of Desire, no one fucking uses this thing, so that was very easy to get. And then the rest of the gear for Ralakesh is usually pretty easy. Just a Void, just a Malachi Loop, a Badge of the Brotherhood. Use a Darkness Enthroned to scale a few things, and then the real tough part was probably Circle of Ambitions. Because we tried to make sure that we were really scaling Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash real nicely, and those are going to be tough to come by. So because of the Ralakesh, because of the circles, we're definitely losing a few points. I'd have to say it's something like a 7. So still a powerful score, still deserves to be one of the builds of the league. Not quite the build of the league though, I don't think. The next build was a rare second attempt at a skill in the same league. I'm not sure that's actually ever happened, but I decided to play Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing a second time because after playing it that first time, I really did think, fuck, I want to try this as a cast on crit trigger, and I don't think anyone's doing that. So had to be the science for myself, and it actually turned out pretty damn well. This was one of the strongest builds for the league. It started out in a very weird direction. I wanted to do like lots of Proj stack, Blazing Salvo, some other elemental shit, and it was not feeling too like crazy. It definitely worked as a CoC trigger, but I thought there's got to be more to it than this. And then I ended up pivoting and respecking to Forbidden Right and trying to scale just like pure chaos in that way. And it did go up several levels because of that. With that, it ended up just doing much more damage, being pretty reliable on life on hit since I was using that. And then I was just doing chaos damage, which is a lot easier to have good damage with a scaling. So the single target ended up being pretty good. The cast on crit triggering was pretty good. And the sustain could be really good thanks to all of the procs that we were doing. And then also using some life gain on hit with ball lightning as well. If we're talking single target damage and stuff, I do think it had okay single target, nothing crazy, but decent enough with the survivability it had that it was pretty much an end game beater. I do think it did lots of tier 17s. I think it did a lot of end game bossing. It could have had a bit more single target, you know, compared to some end game builds, but it was solid enough for how meme and thick it was that I was pretty pleased with the end result. I think became the best build I tried this league so far was the title for this video, which means it even usurped the tornado build that I just then showed off. So it's hard to remember given that things are like 2 months ago, but let's try and give that some freaking ratings as well. Effectiveness, it took a while to ramp. It took a respec from the first version to the second version as well. I think it has to be more like a 9, even though, yeah, I said it's the best, compared to like the actual clear and overall package. I think it's just a little bit under that tornado. The enjoyment ended up being a 10 because cast on crit, huge memes. The bouncing, love that. Still do recommend everyone try some of this bouncy poison flask throw at some point of their life. And the realisticness of the gear. I don't remember what the gear was like, and it's not posted there because it wouldn't let me at the time when I was trying to post the gear. So if I try and remember by looking at it, nope, can't do it. If I try and look at it through my own build link, yep, big CI action. Did use all kinds of thick Necropolis gear, which is a tough one to ever replicate. So I do believe almost all of that energy shield stuff is just juicy Necropolis action. And a Tides of Time belt that let us perma-sustain flasks. We've also got a Dying Sun, we've got a Taste of Hate that's been nerfed, and some pretty high-end gems. So tough on the gear, but not impossible. At this point, given that Necropolis made a lot of those energy shield gear pieces, maybe Recombinators bridged that gap, but we had some pretty crazy gear thanks to Necropolis, and it's definitely not quite that replicable. I'd say maybe like a 5 on that scale. You'll still be able to get there, but it'll be tough to do. So give that a 24. The next build was a bit of an interesting one in that it was quite a different take on a bow build than I'd ever done before. And that's because it was using Poised Prism to utilize stat stacking for all of your damage with a Widow Hail. So our bow actually had fuck all damage, none actually, and all of our damage was coming from almost tripling the stats or the damage gained from stats on a Poised Prism. I then built it as an Inquisitor because I was trying to replicate what one particular meme lord in my chat had done before, and that is build an Inquisitor tornado shot with the Poised Prism, but I was doing my own variant of it, and yeah, it's a crazy build. We went CI, not quite CI, we went hybrid, so I had a lot of life and energy shield regen at the same time, and leech and stuff like that, so we could justify building a pretty thick character. We had ailment immunity, we had lots of evasion, but then most importantly of all, we had a fuck ton of damage. I used Tornado Shot, even though I think it was just recently nerfed, so once again tried to go in batting for a nerfed skill that everyone was like, don't care about that thing anymore. And it still worked really freaking well. So it was a big all-around package of a character because it cleared like a monster, it had good survivability, and then it had good single target, and it was pretty damn hipster. Some of the stuff was maybe a bit tough to put together just because I went high end on this. But a more basic version should also be kind of realistic too. But as you can see, Tornado Shot still fucks, even with some nerfs. Just make sure you build enough attack speed, make sure you build enough damage and proj, and you got yourself a still big winner of a skill. Tornado Shot certainly doesn't need everything that it had before. So I think some boss damage there, and I'm pretty sure it farmed tier 17s, and could be a safe enough character given that it's a bow build, and then actually a thick bow build for a change as well. What do we got here? Nice little 4-way action. See how that goes. Yep, pretty decent. Yep, damage. Yep, thick. Yep, fast. And yep, hipster. So to have a look at this thing, I do believe It was basically a 10 on effectiveness. I do believe it was a lot of fun to play, unless we have to call it basically a 10 on enjoyment. How was the gear though? If we then consult the sacred texts, nailed it. We have a poised prism with one additional arrow. Kind of important because you want to end up at least doubling that and thus getting more arrows. So this thing by itself was about 10 divines, but not too many people were going for these things, so it wasn't that hard to get at the time. But if they are, very hard to get. We then had an additional arrow on that one. Once again, about 5 divines, 10 divines, something like that. Not too many people are going for them, but going to be a hard, expensive item. The rest is pretty realistic. Sakawal's Nest, first time I use this thing, a lot of stats, and not too many people go for these, fairly cheap item. Crown of Eyes, you got your Shaper's Touch, you got some basic sort of gear there. These are going to be tough for sure in the coming leagues, unless you utilize some Calandra technology to have lots of stats because of that. I crafted these from Necropolis, first try, so it was very easy during the Necropolis League, but outside of that, very hard to replicate. So you'll be able to do some other stuff instead in its place. We've got recombinators, we've got Calandra jewelry. You still be able to make up that amount of stats without having this exact type of item. And then, of course, you can get some stats in multi. And if you get a low roll, it wasn't very expensive for an Eyes of the Great Wolf like this. High rolls on these, some of the most expensive out there, but that was not. So not super unrealistic, just a couple of tough items to get. So unfortunately, it doesn't get, huge scores, but it is realistic enough gear. It is stuff that's pretty attainable, viable, craftable, whatever. I have to say something like a 6. So a 26, even though I'm pretty sure this is by far build of the league. And that's just how it is. The rating score is not flawless. Next up were actually some weird things that happened. I played 2 builds that did not have videos thus far, and that's because one of them was very weird, and at the same time I didn't really have the time to make a video at the time. I think we had to play something else or I had to travel. I don't fucking remember what happened, but I could not make a video in time for this one, and it wasn't particularly worth making a video for, so I didn't worry too much about it. And then there's this one, the one I'm currently online on. Also didn't get a video around to it because we had to start playing something like D4 Season 4, I think, something like that. And it was also another not super worth character for a video. So to do some quick talking about what happened with this one, Prismatic Burst Ignite. I had once before tried Prismatic Burst and it was a hit base and it didn't feel that good. I wanted to have another go at it with an Ignite base because it has some of the biggest numbers in the game when it's level 35. You scale some Ignite with it, you do Deadly Ailments, Swift Affliction, Burn, and then have some sort of trigger for it, and in this case I used Shield Charge, so I was shield charging around, doing explosions, and then doing Ignite. And I pretty much went all out for this shit. I did Ralakesh, I stacked Alessia's for affliction charges. I did all kinds of other cool shit, +1 max frenzy there. I went Badge of the Brotherhood. I went, some pretty high-end gear for some of this stuff. And the end result was not very good. It could clear decently. It looked kind of cool, but the single target really wasn't that impressive, and I think the actual survivability was in the end not that impressive as well. I even used +1 frenzy, Necropolis gloves too, which are pretty crazy. So that's why I kind of didn't make a video. The TLDR is I'm still not sure Prismatic Burst has any real good application. This one was okay, but that's just after putting a lot of work into it. So an Ignite version, not the best, not the fanciest. And then I'll skip over this and come back to it in a sec to just go over CoC EK BV. So this was another build I kind of went all in on to make sure I could do something with it. I played something like this a long time ago, but I wanted to bring it to the forefront in today's technology, and it's a full Eternity Shroud build, meaning I need lots of Shaper gear to have Ignore Chaos Res. And as you can see, we do have a lot of damage with all the elements, but then lots of chaos on top of that. And so you're kind of split between 50-50 chaos and elements. It means you have to take care of two different things, both chaos scaling, wither, and then some penetration from the other elements. The end result was it kind of cleared decent. It didn't have huge single target compared to what I would have wanted it to do. And it was a bit squish. It could definitely do some maps. It could definitely blaze through certain things. But it wasn't what I was really hoping. I was hoping it would be kind of a callback to a build I did a few years back, which I think was pretty high-end at the time. Instead, it felt like it was just lacking a little bit in almost every category. But it was fun to do another cast on crit Cyclone and build a two-hand exquisite blade. And I tried to use Val Blade Vortex as extra single target in my 6-link. And then, yeah, as you can see, this is basically what it would look like. You can effect there. It was a bit lackluster as well. This is all of the gear. It's all shaped, and some CDR and some real nutty Necropolis stuff. This thing was like 2 divines, and then I think I finished it off myself. I don't even remember. But yeah, stuff that just doesn't exist anymore, you know. Maybe it's doable with like recombinators, but in any case, this didn't seem super worth doing. You're better off just building like a self-cast EK, I think. Like with this exact same technology, I thought probably better off just building self-cast, no cast on crit. And EK in particular really wants anemies at this point. Without anemies, you are at a very low effectiveness compared to what you could be with EK. So you can still do EK without anemies, but you know what will happen if you had one, and thus you feel kind of bad not having one. So with that, let's have a few scores for these things. The effectiveness of this, it cleared well, it didn't single target very well, it has to have something like a 6. The enjoyment, sheer charging around is just kind of lame everywhere when there's like stuff you collide on. You're still melee, the single target's not huge. I don't know, it was kind of fun to put together, not super fun to pilot. The gear, not at all realistic, we're talking like a fucking 2. Because it's some high-end shit, and it's some very niche specific shit. So that gives us a score of like a 15, right? If we're talking the CoC Spin BV then, the effectiveness of this one, it could clear pretty well. Once again, single target, nothing that great. We are then talking an effectiveness of probably also like a 6. Like, still nothing that great. The enjoyment of it, I'd say, was a bit more. Cyclone, CoC, that sort of stuff. Probably give it like an 8. Realistic gear, it was a bit more realistic. It's still going to be hard to put together. Not quite a 2, I don't think. We give this someone something like a 4. So in total, that's an 8. And then the final build we had was another bit of a surprise package. Wasn't the final build, it's just before this, whatever. Final build we're rating, Void Sphere of Rending, I think is what it's called. The big special transfigured ability here is that you can spam Void Spheres. Conventionally, Void Sphere has like a 10-second cooldown, does some suction, and doesn't hit too hard. This one, however, you can spam, but you can only have one of them up. So you use Void Sphere, it will do a bunch of suction, does some good damage. You press it against somewhere else, that first one disappears, and thus it does create a bit of a weird playstyle. You want to make sure you are critting hard, you are killing things quickly, and then your second one comes in, and it doesn't really detract from the first one at all. So as far as the build is concerned, it actually was very powerful. It did some serious damage, and how could it not? We are utilizing Ralakesh Cheese Tech once again. But for Void Sphere, I really didn't expect that kind of damage. It had big, chonky hits. I went with an Occultist, I think, that went like maybe full Chaos conversion, I think it was. And we were critting for like 2 or 3 million per tick. And on top of that, it had a real cool effect. With this MTX, even without the MTX, the suction is super powerful, but with this MTX, you got this like real cool red suction tech, and it was just a cool skill to play with. It was a lot of fun to build, it was a lot of fun to pilot, and I think, yeah, more Void Sphere in the action quite potentially, because it was just kind of worth it. We did go low life, and tried to go, like I basically built around the gear that was available. I think from memory at this point. So it did some Ubers, it did some good single target. Watch the video if you want to watch more of that. From memory, I basically built around the gear that was available. I went with a chest that had +2 AoE and +2 duration, and Ghost Wrath came up. And that meant that I could go low life and try and still get a lot of chaos res and some life, and then balance the two and not die to chaos res. But if it wasn't for that, I would have built it a slightly different way. So I basically just built into this because this was very available at a very cheap price. It was like a divine or something. So fuck it, why not? We then did go, of course, Ralakesh, very powerful, and you're basically a dumbass for building a spell with power charge stacking to not use Ralakesh, because we stack power charges, we get maximum benefit of all those power charges of the Timeless Jewel with Dominus, Inner Conviction, so you still get all of the benefits of the Frenzy charges as well. It's just crazy. It's like too much scaling to forego. Had to do it, and it was also the first time I ever used Graven's Secret for absorption charges, so that all of my energy shield was giving me back recoup for energy shield from elemental damage. So it was kind of nice to take care of elemental damage that way and recoup. And then I tried to take care of some physical reduction with like precursor rings, and I don't know, you'd swap on a Mings just for extra damage, but it made you weaker. So it was pretty thick on the gear, it was pretty thick on the damage, pretty thick on the scaling. Overall, Void Sphere was a very strong build. It could have been a bit faster, I'd say, it was maybe the only criticism, but otherwise a very strong piece of action indeed. Pretty much a 10 on effectiveness, pretty much a 9 on enjoyment, could have been a bit faster. Realistic gear, it's not far off being doable, but it was a bit tough to put it together. I feel like this needs either a 6 or a 7. I should probably give it a 6 if it's similar to that. Yeah, why not? So with that, in total, we give it something like a 25. Pretty powerful stuff. And yeah, Void Sphere in the future again, would look forward to it. But of course, we're about to walk into Melee League, so chances are 15 melee characters in a row are upon us. A lot of the builds I just then played were kind of buffed because of the melee stuff. A lot were kind of untouched, but some other interactions changed, so wouldn't really be doable once again. I'm looking forward to the next league. There's going to be some serious melee action. I think there's a chance that we are all too powerful, and there's a chance that shit is too easy. There's also a chance that that's fine, and we just have a lot of fun with it. So yep, hope you guys enjoyed the Necropolis rating and the most recent league rating video. Hopefully it did something for you. If it didn't, my condolences. I'm sorry. Sorry for wasting your time. But my ad revenue now. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.